Welcome to 5 Good Minutes. You're listening to today's inspirational message on the fruit of the Spirit with Dan Irvin.
Well, welcome back to the 5 Good Minutes podcast. And as we've been looking at the word faithfulness, as Paul talks about it as a fruit of the Spirit in Galatians chapter 5, and what that means. You know, and I know that we live in a world where uncertainty at times feels like the only thing that we actually can count on. As ironic as that is, we make our plans, we build relationships, we pursue all these dreams, and yet on a regular basis, at least this is true for me, I'm reminded of how little control I actually have into any of these things. So I want to look at today the story of Ruth in the Old Testament, because I think it offers a profound picture of what it means for God to be faithful to us, his unwavering faithfulness, even in the midst of circumstances that are less than ideal. So if you're familiar with the story, in Ruth chapter 1, we meet Naomi, a woman who has experienced and suffered a loss. She's left Bethlehem with her husband and 2 sons because of a famine and seeking a better life in a new land in Moab. And while she was there in Moab, her husband dies, and then both of her sons pass away as well. And so Naomi is left with 2 daughters-in-law who were not of Moabite descent, Orpah and Ruth. And they're in a foreign land. And here's Naomi, devastated, empty, filled with pain and grief. And so it's at this point that Naomi's life probably feels like a series of shattered hopes and shattered dreams. She had gone to Moab with her family to survive, but now all that remains are these broken dreams. So in her pain, she decides to return to Bethlehem where the famine has finally ended. And Naomi urges her daughters-in-law to stay in Moab where they could rebuild their own lives. Orpah stays, but Ruth clings to Naomi and makes a pretty remarkable declaration in Ruth, verse 1 through 16. It says, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." You know, Ruth's words are often quoted here for, I think, their beauty, but they also represent something else. This is an extraordinary act of faithfulness to her relationship with her mother-in-law. She's committing herself to Naomi, but more importantly, she's committing herself to the God that Naomi believes in. Ruth doesn't know what the future holds. She's leaving her homeland. She's stepping into an uncertain life in Bethlehem, which would have been a huge risk where she lived in that time period. Yet in that uncertainty, she demonstrates her trust in God. And here's where we begin to see something pretty cool happen in the story. God's faithfulness works through this ordinary act by Ruth, this human faithfulness. Because of Ruth's loyalty to Naomi, we see a reflection of God's covenant loyalty to his people. Ruth's decision to walk into an unknown future with Naomi mirrors the way God enters into our lives. Even when we are at our lowest, God decided to enter in to our lives. And here's what's remarkable at this point in the story. Neither Naomi nor Ruth sees God's plan, I think. Naomi feels bitter and abandoned. And in verse 20, she says, "The Almighty God has dealt very bitterly with me." And yet, here we know, behind the scenes, God is already at work. Ruth's faithfulness to Naomi will ultimately be used by God to write a story of redemption, and one that ultimately, if you read through the Old Testament, leads to the birth of King David, and centuries later to Jesus, as Jesus comes directly from the line of David. So here's what I see. God's faithfulness in this, it's often unexpected. It's especially in moments of uncertainty, and it might not always, we might not always see it. But God is in some way working behind the scenes, weaving his purposes together, even through pain and confusion. Naomi couldn't see it, Ruth couldn't see it, but God was working, aligning everything for this magnificent plan that he had set out. And this is truly the essence of what it means to have faith, trusting in God's faithfulness even when we can't see the outcome. So how do we respond in seasons like this of uncertainty? Are we like Ruth? Are we called to faithfulness? Well, we are called to faithfulness, not because of our ability to see how it might turn out, but because we trust in the character of God. We may not always get it, understand the details, know what God's up to, but we know that God is first faithful, that he is good, and that he never abandons his people.
Thanks for joining us here today. There's a lot of great content to explore on Orchard Hill Plus and on the Orchard Hill main feed from the weekend. Have a great day.